Hello everyone, how are you? In this video, as the title suggests, we are going to go over how to make embroidery patterns in Procreate. Now this is just for Procreate, so if you're using Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator, which is also a really great program to make embroidery patterns, this probably wouldn't help. However, some things could apply to it, but anyway, this is for Procreate. And I am going to be using a default brush, the Studio Pen, so don't worry about having to download one. Now I have chosen an image that could be considered very hard to pick apart because of all the dark shades. There's so many black hues that you wouldn't see otherwise. However, if you can't, or if you're having a hard time and you really want to do embroidery of something with a lot of black, you can always just go into the curves and play around until you can see the different shadings. Now to make the outlines, you do want to create a second layer so you're not putting the pattern over the image and ruling it useless because you won't be able to transfer that. But I'm using a very light blue so you can see what I'm doing. Now the way I make my patterns is that I zoom in as much as I can, or just as much as I need, to be able to see the hard outlines of what we're embroidering, in this case, the cat. So every little bump of that the fur is creating, I tend to outline all of it. For this video, I probably would have made it a little bit closer to the fur, but it really doesn't matter because when you're embroidering this kind of subject, needle painting in this case, you're going to add those small furs probably at the end of everything just to give it the fuzzy effect. But the outside of any subject is probably the easiest, but so we are going to go into the other parts of the cat, so you can get an idea of how I choose what to outline and what I choose to leave out of the outline so that it's not too much noise that you get super lost when you're trying to look at the reference of your subject. So getting into the finer details of the cat, you kind of want to just notice every color change and mark which ones would be important to you. Now, I do struggle still with trying to choose which ones I actually need and which ones my brain can just study and apply. And what that means is that our eyes are pretty much trained to be able to look at all these colors and kind of memorize where they should go. So if you have a very basic outline of the cat, you can apply where to put the colors even without marking all the details with outlines. Everyone is different. Even if I were to look at this image again, I probably would outline it different once again because our brain is just always focusing on different things. However, just try not to make all of your outlines over detailed to the point where you can't even tell what you're looking at. So a great example, I went over every single detail of this bee and I put it next to a simplified version, or one that's still very detailed but noticeable and pleasing to the eye. The other one is just way too detailed. It's so noisy that you can barely tell where things are. You're just gonna get lost, and overall it's just better to, if you notice that you are putting way too much details, just look over the image again and try to erase and create a different outlined image. But going back to why I chose such a dark image is because you kind of need to realize that there are color changes when you are able to take an image and put it so close up. Our brain loves not to have to work overtime, so we often have a selective memory for analyzing. So when we are looking at colors that are so very similar, we tend to process them as just one. So that's what I love about Procreate, especially because we can, with our own hands, zoom into these pictures, really study where there is a contrast and where there's light, so that we can use that in embroidery later. This is especially helpful when you're trying to pick the color of thread to use, and for needle painting especially, it can look very weird if you are doing this cat and just using a solid black and just no other tones to create the image. It'll look very flat and no depth will be created. Now, even if you are not doing needle painting and you are going for something a bit more simple and not so complicated, this outlining will still very much help you if you're just trying to create maybe a small flower, but you want it to look kind of detailed so it brings a bit more life to it. Then you do want to do these to be able to help your brain practice and realize these color changes to give it that depth of life to it. And this is something that will always come with practice because, like I mentioned, our brain tends to focus on, even if it's the same image and you do the outlines 2-3 times, each individual one will look different because we just focus all the time, especially when there's so much detail on different things. And maybe we'll make one portion bigger than we last did, or one smaller, or even add more color changes that we notice. But here you can see, even on the front where it connects to the nose, the fur, there are in very small color changes, but including every single detail would just make it very complicated to transfer as a pattern, and it will also make you feel overwhelmed because you have to look at all these different things and make sure, when in reality, even if you don't get every single spot specifically the way that it is on the cat, our brain will translate it in a way where it will look normal, and so you don't have to worry about all those really tiny ones. But again, even if your image was easier to notice the color changes than this one, it's still good to make outlines because, especially if your subject is an animal or even a plant, you want to make sure that the direction of the thread or your stitches is going to flow with the image. So if you notice this ear, it's probably kind of hard to notice, but the fur on the ear is very much pointing in a horizontal direction rather than straight up to the right of the ear. I hope that makes sense. I'll probably put arrows here so you can kind of get a sense of what I mean. But if you were just trying to look at this at the top of your head, well, ears are pointing upward. So you would probably try and put the fur or your stitches upward. And this would make the photo lose balance because it's actually a lot more detailed than that. Not only is making outlines going to help you with including details where the colors look very much one tone, but it's going to help you realize the flow and the shape of what you outlined. So you can go back and look at this outline, be able to kind of put it on the map and be able to really concentrate on that spot again and notice how the parts of your subject, in this case fur, what direction it's going. Both of these are super important to bring the embroidery to life in a stitchy kind of way. Now I have gone over to the darkest side of the cat, but I remembered that this is not going to appear the same to everyone depending on your computer or your phone or your TV's definition. You might just see totally black here, or you could probably see maybe slight details, but I did notice on the iPad some very small details, and so that's why I'm kind of choosing these spots. They have very subtle brown tones that I chose, and so if you don't see it, that's basically how I chose what to section off. But going to a part that's way easier to notice what I'm doing. Normally your eye would just give this eye a very single tone of green or very light green. But there are actually darker spots and very lighter spots. And so highlighting or shadowing these things will create a very realistic effect on the eye, or even a glass effect with the lighter spots especially. And so that's why it's so important to go over these details and outline them so that you don't create a very, very flat image otherwise. Because all of these have a very subtle change in color, and so outlining it will just help you note where to put them. On the other eye especially gives us a clear example of a perfect highlight in the eye to create such a glossy effect. Now, while you can probably use the lightest tone of green on the color scale, I would recommend using just straight up white, because this is going to give you a drastic effect, because it's going to really stand out. All the other tones, while they may be very light in some spots, they are a different color. Well, they have color. So doing that will just really bring it all together in realism, and even if you're not going for very, very much detail, it'll still give you the depth that an image needs. Now, I didn't finish the whole outline for the pattern of this cat, but it was just enough for the info for this video. But always, if you have any questions, comment down below. Now, when you are transferring, that's a different story. There are several ways to transfer your image to fabric, so that would have to be a whole other video. So if you want to see that, let me know. And with Procreate, since these are all for light fabrics or printing onto light fabric, or if you're tracing, well, you don't have to, but you can also separate subjects by color. So for example, to make this less overwhelming, I made the colors a light purple so that it doesn't get lost with the bee outline and doesn't overwhelm me with all this detail. And a quick tip also for Procreate is that if you have already made the outline in a color, you can easily change the color just by making a separate layer. Because the outline, the original one, is transparent, you can just drop a color onto the new layer that you just made. You're just going to tap on the layer and apply clipping mask. Clipping mask is an effect that will make it stick directly onto the other layer. You can do this and you can just drag any color, play around. You can hide the layer, delete it if you don't want it and you want the original, but it just helps so that you can easily just put it in another color. But that is how you make an embroidery pattern using Procreate. I hope it helped, and let me know if you have any questions at all.